Wakening Lair. This game is a dungeon crawler, and it is a dungeon crawler that feels different from many other ones, the games in the same genre. Many dungeon crawlers, because you're underground and it's dark, you have a certain impression that the action is happening at night. Finding a dungeon crawler that you get the sense that the action is happening in the morning, as the monsters are waking up and stretching and thinking, okay, it's time to go and populate the room and see if any heroes are coming up. So it's a dungeon crawler in which, yes, the monsters will awaken one after the other. The dungeon will become very busy, very fast. You will find yourself swarmed by monsters coming right and left, and you're pushing your way through them to try to reach or get as close as possible to a final chamber in which there is a big boss that is also going to wake up, and as soon as he or she or it wakes up, it's gonna be like, oh my gosh, I overslept, I got a world to destroy out there. So you're going to try to stop the big boss before the boss comes out. It is a cooperative game. Each player will play a classic archetype of fantasy, and it is mainly, as you will see, a dice game. So there's going to be dice manipulation. You're going to collect items to try to increase your chances of rolling certain numbers, which also means a considerable luck factor. In any case, let's take a closer look at Wakening Lair. The game is played on a dungeon which is formed by a line of 12 room cards. You shuffle them and you place them face down in a single line at the beginning of the game. Each dungeon also has a big boss. There are several boards that represent the big boss. You shuffle them at the beginning of the game and you take a random one and you place it face down on the final space of the dungeon on room 12. And then, well, as you can imagine, the players will move from there, will go around the dungeon, exploring rooms, defeating monsters, acquiring treasures, becoming more powerful, pretty much leveling up, until an event will trigger a confrontation with the big boss. The big boss will awaken and will start moving through the dungeon. And the heroes will win if they're able to defeat the big boss before the big boss escapes the dungeon. The heroes also lose if the boss escapes, and they also lose if one of the heroes dies and the players don't have magic means to resurrect that hero. Speaking of the heroes, here is the selection of heroes that can be chosen. Each is available in male and female, and I really like that, something I highly respect. And we have interesting archetypes of fantasy, from the bard, the barbarian, the ranger, the wizard, etc, 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 the paladin. And suppose that in this game we are playing with the paladin, we are playing with the monk, and with the bard. I love playing with the bard in this game because, contrary to so many fantasy games, the bard can kick butt. The bard is a perfectly legitimate character. Now, each character has two types of basic attacks. The attacks they start with: a special ability, which sometimes is a passive ability, like in the case of the monk, and sometimes it is an ability that uses an action. Each character has a weapon preference. They'll be fighting better when they equip that kind of weapon, and each character has a health track. Basically, when you take hits, you take them from top to bottom. That is, you place wound tokens first on the one on top, and then if you take another wound, you go to the next one, and so on and so forth. And if you place a token in the last space of your track, you die. The number that you see on the health track also is the number to hit. Basically, when an enemy rolls dice, if an enemy rolls a 6 against kata, and this is the situation, then the enemy will place a cube there. And if the enemy has more dice that then match the next number to hit, they match or exceed the number to hit, they score further points. Suppose the enemy there's a situation and the enemy has rolled those dice, the enemy scores a hit because 6 matches that one, but 2 does not match or exceed that one. Suppose that the enemy has rolled these 2 dice, then actually the enemy will score 2 hits against the opponent. By the way, this is how combat works also when you roll against the enemies, and this is the general idea. You determine the number of dice that you roll them, apply modifiers, and then you're trying to fill the boxes of the person or monster that you're attacking in order, and you can fill as many as you possibly can with your results. Now, when your turn starts, the first thing that you do is you roll 2 dice to determine which room will awaken. Each room, there will be a room that is flipped up every turn. If the room determined by the dice is already up, that is already revealed, then all that you do is you add a monster. Yes, we also had these 2 decks, one with monsters and one with treasures. So we roll to determine the room that awakens this turn, and that would be room number 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We flip it face up, and we'll see a symbol there. This is called room advantage. Players or characters that have that type of weapon equipped, they're using that type of attack in the weapon in that room, get a +1. The room just makes it easier to attack with that kind of weapon. So each die that you roll in that room in combat with that kind of weapon, it gives you a +1. Here we have a number that will be 1 or 2, which indicates the number of monsters to be found in that room. So we simply draw a monster and we place it there. These are the boxes of the monster, the boxes that need to be filled in with wound tokens to defeat the monster. This is the weakness. If you're attacking a monster with that type of attack, for example, she could, then if you score at least a hit, you can attack again. Basically, you can attack multiple times as long as you keep hitting, inflicting at least 1 hit each time, and you can go like this until the monster is destroyed, or you roll an attack within that category that does not score a hit. And again, in this case, if she's rolling, I suppose because of game effect, she's rolling 2 dice, then she would score 1 hit because it's 6. The 6 matches the 6, so the die rat, the 3 is not good enough, the attack will be over, but she can press the attack, and so she rolls again, and now with the 4, she removes the die rat, the plague rat. And when you remove a monster from the board, you draw a treasure. Holy moly, there are some cards in the treasure deck that are not treasures, they're traps, and so pretty much, well, you do what they say, which is you roll a die and resolve the bad effect. Most treasure cards, luckily enough, are actually treasures, and they represent a weapon on one side and a magical item on the other side. So basically, when you get, also you may get a Scroll of Resurrection, very important. So when you get when you get a card, which is weapon or magic items, you choose how to equip it. If you place it under your character card, on the left side, with only the weapon visible, then guess what? You equip the weapon. You could also place it the other way around, and then you have equipped the magic item, but you can equip only one, not both. Weapons, you can equip multiple ones, but only 1 per type, and weapons will give you extra dice. When you're attacking, the basic attack when you start the game is 1 die, 1d6. If you attach a weapon that matches your weapon preference, you get an extra die. If you also have the weapon has an icon here that matches your natural attacks, that gives you an extra die. This weapon gives her 1 extra die because it matches the preference but not the type of weapon. Let's see what would be a super awesome weapon for her. This one. This weapon matches the preference. This weapon matches the preference and matches the type of attack, and so she will be able to roll 3 dice when attacking with that one. Pretty neat, huh? As for the items, for the treasures that you get, well, you can redirect hits. You can get effect markers. These are represented by these white tokens. When you get effect markers, you can then spend them to increase or decrease a die roll by 1. Get a reroll. Resurrect, always nice to have. So different types of swap rooms in the dungeon. So nice different types of effects. Get an additional action. So these are some of the main concepts. So once you have those, gameplay is really pretty simple. As we said, you start your turn by awakening and populating a room. And let's populate this one just for fun. Then your character, your active character, will get to act. Again, you start from that area there and you use a token that matches the symbol of your character. Yet there we have a room that has one monster. We draw it from the deck. And what you can do, actually, suppose for the sake of the argument that actually we are here in the game and we have this room. This room has been emptied by previous heroes, and this room here has these monsters here, and our active character is here. And actually, this is also a situation. Basically, during your turn, you have 3 actions. You can spend an action to move. A single move action allows you to move actually any number of rooms as long as you're entering rooms that are empty of monsters and traps. As soon as you enter a room with a monster, your move ends, but you could spend another action of your 3 actions to keep moving. An action is also to attack, and so you can declare an attack, and at that point, as we said, you roll the number of dice that is allowed to you by your character, your abilities, the situation. You possibly apply a bonus, and simply after you declare the attacker, the target of your attack, you roll dice, and you see how many hits you score. If you are attacking the weakness of the enemy, and you score at least a hit, you can press the attack, and pretty much that's the general idea. So again, you can move multiple times, you can perform the attack actions multiple times, you have individual actions, but these are the main things that you do in the game. Again, you go back and forth, run around, kill monsters, collect tokens, collect treasures until a card that is shuffled towards the bottom of the deck is revealed, and this card will trigger the big monster. The big monster, again, there are several possible big monsters. At the end of each player's turn, the big monster will move down a room. Also, when the big monster awakens, you flip all of the cards face up. And then big monster moves around, and also, if there are other monsters that are still in the dungeon, the big boss collects them. The big boss uses them as allies. So if, for example, the big boss moves in that room there, then the next time the big boss moves, the big boss will drag those 2 monsters with him or her or it or them, or it depends on what the gender and identity of the monster is. The point is that you want to clear your dungeon as much as possible before the big boss awakens, because again, the big boss will take those monsters with him or her or them, and in order to be able to attack the big monster, you need to first remove all of these other monsters that are guarding the big boss. So it's very important, because once the big boss awakens, you only have a limited amount of time to defeat the big boss before the big boss escapes the dungeon and you lose the game. And so these other monsters guarding the big boss can be really, really annoying. Again, that's an incentive. That gives an incentive early on to remove these people, so then you can maximize your attacks against the big boss. And this is pretty much how you play Wakening Lair. Now, I like this game quite a bit, and maybe a little bit more than I expected I would after I read the rulebook. And after I played the first couple of turns, I was afraid, well, this feels a little too basic for me, too much randomness, etc, etc, etc. And yet, as the monsters started coming to life in different waves and in different combinations from game to game and in different rooms, so that, of course, made it possible to exploit certain advantages, to use certain strategies, to create synergies. Well, as all these things started happening, as the game reached its full action, the game became, I would say, I don't know, disproportionately interesting. Disproportionately when compared to how simple the game is, because it really is. Roll those dice, put them in order, etc, etc, etc. And of course try to use some tokens, try to use some abilities. But it was fun to equip those items to the heroes and figuring out which side you would want to equip. It was fun to figure out, well, pretty much what to do next. If you would use all of your actions to attack a monster that is next to you, maybe in your same room, but you're not the ideal hero for the task, or spend actions moving to reach a monster that you have all the possible advantages against. But then, if you don't roll well, alas, then you don't have any other actions to try again. So it turned out that there were some decisions, very simple, very linear, but that they seemed to have some meat to them. There definitely were reasons to be interested. And at that point, actually, I appreciated that the game was keeping me entertained, while at the same time being so linear, being quick enough that it did not overstay its welcome, while at the same time creating a perfectly valid narrative arc. Definitely there's a sense of progression from the time when the dungeon is all in the dark and nothing or not much is happening, to of course when you have the final confrontation with the monster. In that final sequence, which is really an appropriate boss fight, really had that sense. I don't know, it's a little bit, I don't know, anti-thematic. The fact that the heroes almost feel like irrelevant to the monster. As the monster, the big boss, keeps moving towards the entrance. Well, from that side is the exit of the dungeon. Of course, the heroes are running after that, and sometimes you have the impression they're grabbing you, like, come on, as the monsters keeps going, dragging the heroes with him or her or it. It's just an unusual thing as you imagine the final fight with the boss as a stand. And here the boss is like, I really don't care about these puny little creatures here. So it's interesting because it's a different way of handling the final boss fight, although there's a certain, I don't know, a little bit anticlimactic aspect to that in seeing my heroes that have become so powerful being ignored by the villain. But that's a really minor thing. Luck and randomness, of course, you're rolling dice all the time, which, however, paradoxically, this is one of those games in which you roll dice often enough that luck, paradoxically, is not going to be too much of a factor because the odds are going to even themselves out. In each game, before you roll the first time, you know you're going to have some crazy, amazing, unexpected, and possibly undeserved victories, and some crazy, amazingly, punishingly occurring at the wrong time defeats when you have all of the advantages and you get bashed by a stupid goblin. So you know that those things are going to happen, and you know that actually the majority of the actions will fall within a curve that will make overall good gameplay worth, well, developing a strategy and making good decisions. So if you're the result of randomness, randomness will throw a wrench in your strategy all the time, but you don't feel that your strategy is irrelevant. Even with good strategy, the game is pretty hard, is pretty tough to beat. I guess, of course, you can create your own variant, start with a monster, with a final boss that has been wounded already, add some wounds there, ignore some of their abilities. As designed, the game is pretty challenging to beat, and I don't see a particular problem with that. That is something that I like. One possible negative, but it's going to be very easy to fix if there are going to be expansions, is that the monsters bring a lot of the final bosses bring a lot of variety to the final section of the game because they do act in very different ways. But then the deck of monsters that you find in between is not that huge, and after a while they will feel a bit samey. After a while I knew that if it was not going to be an orc, it was going to be a goblin, it's going to be a bat, it's going to be a rat. Pretty much the order changes, but you get to see this always or almost always the same faces. So the central part of the game, after a couple of times, started feeling a little bit, again, samey, but not a big deal, especially if indeed new monsters are added in future editions. As is, Wakening Lair is a perfectly entertaining game. It has interesting decisions, it has fun characters, which also work very different from one another, so there is that will keep the game fresh despite the fact that the monsters are more or less the same. So it has an interesting narrative arc, some interesting decisions. There is just the fun of going through a fantasy dungeon adventure in less than an hour, which is not a bad thing. You also have the fun of having a fully cooperative dungeon adventure, which takes less time to set up and play than other fully fully cooperative dungeon adventures, such as, for example, the ones that you have in the D&D board games. It can also be played solo, as long as you, by yourself, control at least 2 characters. So, a lot of good things about Awakening Lair. Definitely a game that I enjoyed.